Welcome to the Fantasy Thinker. I'm Jared Quartermage, and today I'm going to be giving you my review of Vaughn Roycroft's Bold Ascension. This is book two in the Sundered Nation Trilogy, and so just imagine, if you will, a sea surrounded by land on all sides, save a narrow strait that leads out into a wider unknown. Imagine the land that surrounds this sea separated by natural barriers like rivers and mountains, deserts and forests. And imagine the people living in this land, isolated, yet brought together by this common body of water. These people trade and interact in many ways, including, of course, war. Eventually, an empire arises to bring together, for good and ill, these disparate elements of interconnectivity. It becomes an entity, a machine that thrives on the wheels of commerce and uses its military might to ensure the bounty flows into the ruling classes. Naturally, what first comes to mind may be the Mediterranean Sea and then the Roman Empire. But what I'm describing is the world of the Sundered Nation Trilogy by Vaughn Roycroft. Specifically, I'm talking about Bold Ascension, the second book in the trilogy. In the first book, The Severing Sun, we were introduced to Valdan, which I believe you could probably assume that's him on the cover. Chosen the chosen one of the prophecy to be the bringer of change and what is assumed to be a glorious reign for him and his people, the Gotari. Um, we are also introduced in the Severing Sun to Alan, a spear wielder, a member of the Skolani, a fierce warrior women's society. And if in your minds you're thinking like Goths and Amazons, then you could be forgiven that correlation. Uh, so it's really not much of a spoiler to say that these two characters continue to be central to the story in this second volume. Roycroft continues to give us an in depth look at these two characters' motivations, fears, ideals, and flaws as they live their lives, either enthralled to a prophecy or in spite of it, depending on the situation. Um, the irony is there is like still no hard concrete proof that this prophecy is real or binding other than people's belief in it. And here is some of where here's where some of Roycroft's strengths lie. His adherence to a very realistic historical narration is really solid here. Every chapter is begun with an epigraph from someone who is writing or relating the history. The epigraph gives you a little hint of what may be coming in the chapter ahead. Yet, we also need to remember who is writing it. While it may seem like the writer is a non biased observer, we do see at some points that she could be very biased indeed. How this unfolds is something left for the reader to determine for themselves. And like any history written by any historian, everything needs to be taken in context to the observer and the translator of the sources. So it's you get that kind of in-depth historical narrative feel to it. Really nice touch that Roycroft used in this second book, particularly, was the passage of time, and I really thought he did that well. It showed that we don't have it's not like a static history here. Events happen and this world continues to move on as our characters get older, and I really liked how he did that. And this is especially relevant in the context with the narrator of this history shown in the epigraphs and how the characters approach their goals and deal with their obstacles. And it's something that I thought was a growth from the first novel. And I was also impressed with the different points of view brought into the second novel. Roycroft, he really expands the world, like he did so with the maps. Like the first volume had a small map and limited viewpoints. Yeah, so the map here, we have a larger map and a larger cast, and it's no accident that we now have points of view from outside Valden's limited sphere of influence. We get to see how people from the Empire view these Gotari barbarians, and we get to see the prejudices, biases, and assumptions made about the Gotari people, and the fear that these things turn into. Um, so if you only read the first book in this series, you'll never get to see the vision of Valdan as a brutal thug in the eyes of his victims. And I thought that was extremely well done. You turned how Roycroft turned the main character into a barbarian. Some that in the eyes of who he was interacting with, that were not his own people, and very very interesting twist there. Um, so for those familiar with history, some of the season here will actually directly remind you of certain earthly historical events, you know, surrounding Rome. This will either like enhance or detract your from your enjoyment of the story, depending on whether you like that sense of familiarity. Um, you may or may not like that this feels like historical fiction, but you can't deny that Roycroft knows how to make it feel that way, and he does it very well. Even the characters' relationships with their gods have a historical feel to it. We know that they really believe in a pantheon and evoke their names whenever appropriate to the situation, including calling them fickle when things don't go right. Um, and their gods in here are based upon the Norse mythology, the Freyr and Wotan and what have you. Um, and so it, I've mentioned history quite a bit in this review, but that may give people a wrong idea. It is a fantasy novel first and foremost. This world is completely secondary. It's made up, but like in the first book, do not expect magic swords, dragons, or wizards to be popping up anywhere. There is an occasional seer or prophetess whose eyes roll up and they spit out gibberish, and others take as the words of the gods. Um, I'm still not 100% convinced that these instances aren't just confirmation bias on the part of the narrator and or the characters involved. I feel that they all want it to be real. They all believe it's real, as they would in this setting and in this cultural, you know, uh, upbringing and what have you, and what you know that jibes with the um, the culture that was created for this fantasy world. Um, and so they're gonna have real reactions to this. And if I think for the reader, it's still up in the air whether the gods actually exist in this world. You'll have to decide for yourself. Um, it's also a fantasy in the fact that there is no sense or outer guide. Like when you're reading historical fiction or even actual history books, like a biographical history book or what have you, um, then you have a sense, you have an outer guide of what happens after the events in that historical fiction in the real world. And so, when you read a history of Napoleon, you know that Europe goes on afterwards to and France goes on and what have you. So And the same thing with historical fiction, even though the events in the may be fictional, um, you still know what goes on in the world that related to those fictional events that's happening is real, and those things, that's your guide, that's your outer guide to those stories. Whereas this is fantasy in the fact that there is no outer guide. We have no idea where this is going to go in the third book, and that's the fun. That's the fun of it right there. So the themes presented in the book are varied. The most prominent is, of course, about taking action when action is needed. That is, being bold ascension, right? Uh, the main character, Valden, um, he harps on this aspect of his destiny consistently. And Alan kind of plays foil to this concept. The, um, the consequences of this interaction are very varied and long lasting, as the questions of what it means to be bold and decisive haunt not just them two, but everyone around them. And there were times in the novel where it seemed a bit heavy-handed during the character interaction, but overall, it was very clear, concise, and very well done. This book is, it is very big. It's quite thick, it's a bit of a chunker. So I recommend taking your time with it, really immersing yourself in this fascinating tale of ambition, colored by like the hazy uncertainty of prophetic rambling. um, so it, a nice thing that Roycroft has done for us in the beginning of this book is he gave us a what has gone before section, and I really like that. I actually wish more publishers did that, especially with these big fat fantasy books. It'd be good to have that what went on before section in your sequels and in your series. Especially if they're longer than a trilogy going on. So I really like that. And I want to really thank Vaughn Roycroft for sending me this advanced reader copy. He made it quite clear that I was under no obligation to read, review, or even like the book, and I really appreciate that. I really appreciate Vaughn sending me to this to me. And the his first book, The Severing Sun, was the second review I ever did on this channel, and I liked it then, and I was very happy to return to the Sundered Nation world. Um, and as you can probably tell by now, I really recommend this series and this book. If you read the first one, then don't hesitate to get into this one. I highly recommend you do so. So, with all that said, thanks for watching. Like and subscribe, and be good to each other. Thank you.